In addition to the points that Professor Shelat very succinctly put yesterday, has to do with the fact that if you want something to happen, if you want a policy to be effective, if you want to craft the best policies, it is imperative that people who are in agriculture are at the head of the table. The majority of the population in most developing countries is dependent on agriculture. So for any policy to be effective, it must involve their understanding of the needs and ramifications of that policy. It must have their buy-in. Hunger, diseases such as malaria, and water are all important and urgent causes, and the well-being of people in the agriculture sector, especially in developing economies, is dramatically affected by them. Thus, policies to address climate change must seriously take into account these urgent needs of people in agriculture. Eradicating hunger can do a lot for the economic and healthy well-being and results in lower greenhouse gas emissions. According to some of my own research, the effect of these policies on the poorer segments of the population is multifold of the effect that it has on the middle class and the upper income groups. For them, any effect on their livelihood is an immediate effect on the potential for death immediately of themselves as well as their children and family. Diseases such as malaria are major causes of economic and health distress. They are much more prevalent in agricultural communities. Sustainable development in agriculture, in order for it to be self-sustaining, needs a healthy and wealthy agricultural sector. These must be addressed before any precautionary principle-driven measures on climate change can be successfully implemented. Water is a critical element for agriculture. Safe drinking water is a critical element of healthy living in rural communities. Availability of water for agricultural needs and access to safe water for human consumption must be a component of any policy on climate change in order for it to be adopted by agricultural communities. Agricultural methods and technologies that are more drought and pest resistant as well as more productive must be developed and made available in order to enhance well-being and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. New technology must also be explored that can reduce damage to agricultural sector from climate change. In order for climate change policies to be effective, they must come from the bottom up. Precautionary principle-driven policies are, on the other hand, top-down and seldom achieve their objective as a result. This requires development of policies suggested at the panchayat and gram level, which will not only be acceptable to the population, but will often suggest better ways of achieving the same objective. Now let me give you a couple of examples, and then I want to come back to that story. Not only did I get the pleasure of meeting Dr. Shelat, whose son was a student of mine a long time ago at SUNY Buffalo, and had been speaking about his dad so proudly for so many years, kept saying, "You have to meet my father, he's a very entrepreneurial leader." In addition, I also got to meet a lot of people sitting around here who had some amazing achievements to narrate. You will hear from one of them in a little while. He's part of this panel, and I had the great pleasure of chatting with him this morning before breakfast about the types of things that they are doing that have an immediate impact on the well-being of people in agriculture, of people in rural areas, And it is input from people such as these who are actively involved at the lowest level that can make any such policy implementable, that can help craft the most appropriate policies. Similarly, one of my friends that I met here was talking about his farm in Bihar yesterday, about how they had managed to utilize this land that was at a very low elevation and therefore kept getting flooded and was not being very fruitful as an agricultural land. About the technology that they developed to make that not only pay a lot of dividends, but also be an appropriate use of that land. Finally, I was reading at the Hotel Orchid, which is an E-hotel by the way, about this village that is entirely powered by the sun. India's first village at Rampura, which is near Jhansi. All 69 houses in the village will now have electricity powered by an 8.7 kilowatt plant. And therefore they've gone totally solar in a sense. So there are lots of things that are happening. And the issue is to pick up these things, look for advice at the lowest level, instead of adopting a precautionary principle that says, this is what you will do. To come back to that old farmer. Now this is an old story. I read it when I was a kid, therefore it is definitely old. And this was a story that my father had heard, so it is even older than that. That story started off with this old farmer who was blind. His wife passes at an early age. His son gets crippled. These are all things that today we have access to technology that can help this person recover his sight, that could have potentially prolonged his wife's life, that could have made his son continue to be an able-bodied person. So it existed then. Now we have the technology to take better care of them. And I think that should be a very principled focus. Similarly, the king ordered that all able-bodied men should come to the war. The same thing that happens, these precautionary principles were in Geneva or somewhere else. It is stated that this is what should be done. And regardless of the status of a country, regardless of how wealthy or poor it is, regardless of its capabilities to handle such policies, this becomes the dictum that must be implemented. That becomes a part of the precautionary principle that I don't think can be implemented because it will not have the support of the people who are actually going to be implemented, on whom this is actually going to be implemented, which is people in the agricultural sector. So they have to be at the forefront of this discussion because this affects them the most. They have to be at the forefront because they can contribute the most, not just in terms of photosynthesis, but also in terms of their ability to prolong the lives of future generations, to provide a better education for future generations, and help lift future generations from the poverty that they have unfortunately suffered